Our next session is going to be equally interesting and informative, I think, and I'm pleased to moderate another one of my colleagues, Rebecca Diamond. She will be moderating the session. Rebecca is the class of 1988 professor of economics at Stanford's Graduate School of Business, where she teaches data and decisions. Her current research studies the causes and consequences of segregation of households by income and education level across neighborhoods and labor markets. She was a postdoctoral fellow at the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, SIEPR, right after she graduated from 2013 to 2014. So we at SIEPR like to take credit for all of Rebecca's success. It's all because of her SIEPR postdoc. She received her PhD in economics from Harvard in 2013 and her bachelor's in physics and economics and mathematics from Yale in 2007. So smart colleague that we're going to learn from. So Rebecca, I'm delighted to pass the baton to you. And I don't see, there she is. Okay, Rebecca, yeah.
Okay, you hear me? Yeah, so we're
Triple major or triple major?
Economics and math is a hybrid single major, so a double major. But, so yeah, I'm super excited to talk today with a number of experts on housing affordability and housing policy. So we're going to have three amazing speakers. I'm going to introduce them now. They'll give you a brief spiel about some of their areas of expertise, and then we'll have some Q&A among us and then Q&A amongst the audience. So first speaking, I'm going to go through everyone the introductions first. We have Enrico Moretti. He is the Michael Peavy and Donald Weil Professor of Economics at the University of California, Berkeley. His research covers the field of labor economics and urban economics. He has received several awards and honors, including the Society of Labor Economists Rosen Prize for outstanding contributions to labor economics. His new book, The Geography of Jobs, has been translated into 8 languages and awarded the William Bowen Prize. He's one of my co-authors as well, so he has a lot of interesting things to say. We also have Mia Kang, the Senior Vice President at Related Companies of California. Mia is a leader in the complex fields of affordable housing, transit-oriented development, and smart growth. Kang has successfully developed multiple award-winning TODs and infill developments that exemplify social responsibility and sustainable design. Her projects have been honored with national awards from the US EPA, the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, the American Institute of Architects, US Green Building Council, and the 2014 Governor's Environmental and Economic Leadership Award, California's highest environmental honor. So she has a lot of perspective from the development side of building affordable housing. And we'll also have Jennifer Hernandez. She has practiced land use and environmental law for more than 30 years and leads the Holland and Knight's West Coast Land Use and Environmental Group. She was recognized as the top environmental litigator of the year in the San Francisco Bay Area by Best Lawyers and received a California Lawyer of the Year award from the State Bar of California for her work on California's largest and most innovative land use conservation agreement between her private landowner client and 5 major environmental organizations. She graduated with honors from Harvard University and Stanford Law School, so Stanford can also take some credit there. And they'll each have a very unique perspective. So we have the law perspective, the academic perspective, and the developer perspective, all of which we all want to figure out ways to get more affordable housing in California. So first up, we'll have Enrico.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be back at SIEPR. I had 2 sabbatical years in my career, and both at SIEPR, and they were tremendously productive and stimulating, so I'm delighted to be back. We live in a state and in a region that are very expensive in terms of housing. You can see here how expensive we are relative to the rest of the US. So in gray, you see the median existing home price in the US, starting in the early 70s. In red, you see California. In yellow, the San Francisco condo. And in black, San Francisco houses. And it's truly remarkable how distant we are from the rest of the country. The difference was not that large at the beginning of the 90s. Francisco, relative to California, relative to the rest of the country. Yes, the region was more expensive, but the gap was not enormous. The gap has been growing ever since, and by the end of the period, which is before COVID, the last year is 2017, but until 2020, the situation hasn't really changed very much. By the end of this period, you see a torrid growth in housing prices in San Francisco and in California, much faster than the rest of the country. This is probably not going to come as a shocking surprise to everybody. The question is why? Fundamentally, mean price increase in California and in the Bay Area because housing demand exceed housing supply. And this imbalance between demand and supply is particularly strong in the urban core, for which I mean the built part of the region. So San Francisco, Oakland, but also the peninsula, all the way to San Jose. The demand is strongest in the urban core because that's where the best jobs are located. And so a lot of people want to locate in this area. That's a good reason for having high housing prices, is because their labor demand is strong and the local economy has been growing at a fast pace in the past decades. The bad reason is that supply is scarce, and it's particularly scarce in the urban core. And it's scarce mostly due to self-imposed supply constraints that we, as residents and as voters, have decided to impose on our community. The main constraints come from a slow and arbitrary entitlement process. It takes years for a developer to go from the phase where they buy a piece of land to the phase where they can pull a building permit. It takes, in some cases, decades, as the next two speakers will attest with much more direct knowledge of the problem. And it's not just that it takes a long time to get entitled, but there is a huge amount of uncertainty on the length of this time. There is an endless appeal process that is particularly costly for developers because not only it takes long, but they don't know exactly how long it takes. And for them, there is a limited window of opportunity to build, which is the cycle. If there is uncertainty on when you can pull the trigger and you can start building, that length of entitlement process becomes even more costly because it really reduces the supply of new housing units that get built in the long run. And there's a growing body of academic work that points to the cost, both the local cost and the aggregate cost that this process has for our region and our state. In this work, joined with a colleague at Chicago, Chang Tai-Shi, we study both how these supply constraints raise rent and housing prices unnecessarily high in the Bay Area, but we also study the aggregate cost of these supply constraints. And we estimate significant aggregate cost for the state in reducing the supply of housing in the most productive part of the state, which would be the Bay Area, for example. So I think it's clear what the message that comes from and this is just one of the many papers that has been written on the subject. I think it's clear that it will be in the interest of us as a region and us as a state to increase the supply of housing, especially where the demand of housing is strongest, meaning the urban core. There are essentially two models of increasing the supply of housing. One, you might call it the Austin model, which is essentially no constraint to supply. In Austin, which is another area where demand for labor has been increasing very fast, thanks to a high-tech boom similar to our. In Austin, Austin has decided to impose very little constraints, both in the urban core and in the periphery of the region. And so essentially, houses get built at a fast pace. Every time there is demand, they get built. Housing prices have increased in Austin, not as much as in the Bay Area. On the other hand, this unfettered model has also generated a lot of congestion and a lot of consumption of environmental amenities. The other model, you can call it the Seattle model, is a model that seeks to concentrate development in the urban core and associate development with increasing public transportation in order to mitigate the externalities. I think in the Bay Area, we have chosen neither model. We are really constraining. The biggest battles against housing are in the urban core, where the demand is strongest and where we build the least relative to demand. And so as a consequence, some of those units get built that should have gone in downtown San Francisco, should have gone in downtown Palo Alto, should have gone in downtown San Jose, should have gone in Oakland, that gets moved to the outskirts of the region. The exurbs, the Central Valley, and even further out. And I think this is costly in a different way. It's costly in terms of negative externality that this process is imposing. First, there is congestion and traffic. Second, and equally dramatic, is the loss of green space. Every time we don't build a unit in downtown San Francisco, essentially that unit gets built on green land. And I think that reduces the environmental amenities of our region. Third, there is the carbon footprint, which is much larger when you move a unit from downtown San Francisco to the outskirts. Let me give you the sense of the magnitudes here. Here in this map, I'm plotting annual tons of CO2 from residential energy use per household in different parts of the Bay Area. This is San Francisco, this is Oakland, this is the outer part of the East Bay, and then up there is Marine. This comes from a study by a former student at Berkeley named Eva Lubitsch, who just received her PhD this year. And what you can see are enormous differences in CO2 footprint depending on where you build. Look at the scale of the differences. In downtown San Francisco, the dark blue, we're talking about 2 annual tons of CO2 per household. Look at the outer part of the East Bay. We're talking about 16 tons of CO2, so 8 times higher. What it means is that every time we fight housing units down here, we're essentially pushing those units out here, and we're essentially increasing not just traffic, not just congestion, not just consumption of greenfield, but also we're increasing our CO2 impact. And then for the units that get built even further out, we're even talking about other additional costs, like for the units that get built close to the hills or close to the mountains, there's also the additional wildfire risk. So I think that in this region, we're facing a very ironic set of self-imposed political constraints. A lot of the appeals that I was referring to are, as Jennifer will illustrate much better and with much more direct knowledge of the problem, are based on CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, which was passed in order to maintain and preserve our environment, but is often abused by local NIMBYs in the urban core to fight urban development in the urban core. Well, ironically, those actions, those politically motivated battles against development in the urban core end up hurting both our environment, but also the global environment. So I think in the Bay Area, we should start looking at the experience of other cities. And I'm not advocating for the Austin model, which is a model of unfettered development, where essentially you build everywhere, both in the urban core and in the outskirts, because I think that model of development is too costly in terms of externalities. I'm advocating for the Seattle model, where you try to develop within the current envelope of existing development. You densify areas that are near transit, areas that are like this one right here, that still have plenty of unused parking lots, undeveloped lots, or like one-story buildings that are zoned not to grow. And I think that's where we should be focusing our push for more supply, because in that way we could start reducing the housing costs without increasing the costly externalities. Thank you.
Great. Next up, we have Mia. If you just advance it forward one.
Good morning. I'm going to bring us to a different perspective. Let's see. Are we? I keep going. Are we here? No. One more. All right. So I'm a housing developer. I've been developing affordable housing in California for the last 24 years. I've built about 2,500 units of affordable housing in this state, both new construction as well as acquisition rehab. I currently work at Related California, one of the largest private developers of affordable housing in the state. But prior to that, I started my own company called Domus Development, where I, battled it out in places like Lake Tahoe. And so Lake Tahoe was one of these pristine areas. Many of you, I'm sure, have a house up there, or go up there regularly to ski or to bike. And it's one of these areas that also has a housing problem, partly because there is a service industry. This is moving faster than I do this, that folks are earning minimum wages. And because they can't find housing in places like Lake Tahoe, because there's very constricted regulatory environments, they often commute to Reno. They can buy a home in Reno for a lot less than they can buy a home in Tahoe. They can rent a home. It's about 100 to 150 miles round trip to go to work. And oftentimes people earn enough wages to live in Nevada if you have 2 or 3 jobs. So talk about CO2, and then oftentimes too, you don't even have, bus drivers cannot find housing in the area, and neither can snowplow drivers. So you can imagine the effect of your emergency service workers who are living in Reno when you've got catastrophes, like whether it's wildfires or you've got snow, and so you can't function service-wise. So I was brought up to Tahoe, at a place called Kings Beach, which is North Lake Tahoe. Many of you might know it. It's in the basin. This is Kings Beach in about 1997. And I was brought to this town because it was a redevelopment area when we had redevelopment back in the day, and 0 affordable housing had ever been built in the basin in Lake Tahoe, 0. Partly because in 1989, we had something called the Tahoe Regional Planning Authority, which sole purpose was to curb development and to create development commodities to make it vastly difficult to build anything but, frankly, beautiful single-family cabins. So, but if you were in the workforce, you lived here. You lived these are the sites I bought. I ended up buying 6 different sites. I showed them over there on the map. These were the sites. There were mobile homes and they were cabins from the 1940s and 50s. And we had, as this cabin would show, 5 people living in 260 square feet. There were mattresses, 2 mattresses on every wall, because you took turns sleeping on the floor at night. You see trash bags and laundry baskets. There was no closets. There were no hamper spaces. So those was actually how people stored their food and their clothing. And oftentimes you had unrelated adults living together. In the trailers, they were there from the 1940s. HCD, our state, monitors all trailers in the state, not your local jurisdiction. So these buildings had often tarps over them. So if it snowed too much, the tarps would actually shed some of the snow, so the snow actually wouldn't collapse it like a tin can. And up to 35 people were once counted living in one of these trailers, submarine style, and you took turns sleeping at night. So you were tapped out at 3 in the morning if your 3 hours in bed were up. That is how people got to live here, and no one actually knew about this. This is the immigrant population. So the vast majority of the folks living here, it's hot red. It is the lowest income, most poor area in all of Placer County, and it's right next to Incline. Do folks know Incline? So, ironies, right? So what we were gonna do, we said, let's try to build infill affordable housing for the first time ever. But it was wrought with challenges. So we had to break every single rule in the book. When we started, you can only build 7 units to the acre and 2 units per piece of land. And this whole area was a designed as a trailer park. And so this was actually one of the oldest urbanized areas around the lake, but there was hunting and fishing camps. And so we took all these different parcels and we came up with a prototype that met every single constricted, hard design. We had 2 regulatory agencies. We had TRPA and Placer County, but we had to rewrite code. We had 6 sites. I had to do 12 different entitlement processes for 6 sites for a total of 77 apartments. We interviewed people. No one had actually interviewed the folks who lived here. We found out that in some cases, people were spending 100% of their income on housing. We're like, how do people get by? Well, it turns out there was a whole shadow industry of a barter community in Kings Beach. And so if you were a fisherman and you can buy, and you went and you had a 10-pound salmon, you slice that thing up and you got childcare, you got a haircut, and you were able to pay someone to share something, right? There was a whole system that people created because no one cared for the folks who actually served us in our hotels, who served us, who made Tahoe work as a resort destination. But it was death by 3,000 razor blade cuts. There was nothing, every single code didn't work, and I tell folks I've never met a plan I haven't had to change because we spent a lot of time planning, spot a lot of money planning all these plans, and they sit on shelves. And so when it actually comes to building something, nothing can be done. So we went in there. I had a machete in one hand and an attitude with the other, right? So we made it happen. So every single one of these was built. We broke every single rule. We had public hearings. I had someone who threatened to chain herself to a tree so we couldn't cut down the tree. But we got it approved for the highest density ever approved in Lake Tahoe at 30 units to the acre. We also got the tallest buildings ever approved. At the minimum, you could do 2 stories, not 3. We not only did 3 stories, we also got the first 4-story building legally ever approved in Lake Tahoe. So by breaking every single rule in the book, we won all the awards. We won that GIA award. We won national recognition for doing the right thing. All these sites are next to transit. They're a 5-minute walk to every bus. The bus only comes once an hour. But then we said, you know what, let's survey folks, because we had to ask for parking reductions. You know, parking's one of those damn things that actually prevents housing, because we care more about our cars, we care more about housing our cars for free than housing our people who work in our communities, right? And so it made me so mad that I decided to spend a lot of my time in the legislature. And I founded a group called the Council of Infill Builders, and then we started advocating for infill housing and trying to show people why all these policies we have and all these regulations we have actually don't lead to the result that we want, which is housing. So that took me 5 years of rigorous entitlement process to get it through. We were able to get funding when the market collapsed, the redevelopment agencies were collapsing, and we got this built. But I said, never again. It is so hard to do. So let's bring us to today. So this is 2000. So now I work for Related California, and we won through my efforts. And because I did the work at Kings Beach, the state executive order, 2019, Governor Newsom came into office, and he said, okay, we're going to take all of our state surplus land, and let's build some housing. Let's prioritize housing. And within 2 years, we want to see some housing happen. So one of the very prime sites that the state had was 11 acres at the Y in South Lake Tahoe. Folks know the Y, probably in South Lake Tahoe, right? So this was nothing but trees. It's only been ever logged. And it's 11 acres of prime development land. We got it approved using SB 35 in 90 days. It's the largest single development of any size in Lake Tahoe approved ever in the history of Tahoe. It was 248 units of affordable housing. We were also able to get a child care, which was lacking in the area, as well as social services, and the nonprofits are displaced because they can't afford to afford any rent. So we designed the whole thing, and oh, by the way, all this was on Zoom. This is all during COVID. So I had a series of meetings working with every single nonprofit group, every single business group, to get them to say yes to housing. We used SB 35 only because the city of South Lake Tahoe was an urbanized area. Outside of that, we could never use it. So the tools that are given to us as developers are so limited. It's like you have to pass through the eye of the needle to get the incentives to work, because not every place is allowed, not every place is San Francisco where you can or LA where you can write all these rules and it all just works, because we just decide that we're gonna put every single low-income person in every single metro area, period, and forget about the problem. But guess what? We have low-income people, we have workforce, we have existing communities all over the state, and there's incredible infill opportunities all over the state. And there's a lot of opportunities to do the right thing only if You can get your public, local officials aligned, as well as resources, as well as removing the barriers. So I became a barrier buster because I'm just so damn angry. So we made heads turn. To get a project of this scope and size approved in 3 months was nothing but a miracle, and because there was a will. So what we were able to do also is, again, take that prototype. So each one of these sort of rectangular buildings are 30 units apiece. And we decided to, because it's Tahoe, Tahoe also has a challenge of snow, and we have a 9-month building cycle from May to October. That's it. You can't move earth after that. Yes, if you've done your foundation, you can go up, but that's it. So what this does is it allows us to phase the project and allows us to build it in the factory. We're working with the Vallejo factory OS to get our modulars built, sent on trucks, so they're going to be stacked in the seasons. And once completed, it will look something like this. They're 3-story townhomes. They're walk-ups, no elevators. We also have all these public trails that allow people to connect through the property. We have the social services. We have the child care. All of this will start to come out of the ground, if all goes well, starting next month. This is our community building that's going to host all kinds of activities, not only for the residents, but also for the community. It absolutely changes the character. And again, this was nothing but trees prior to the land. And let me tell you about trees and how challenging it is to cut down a tree in Tahoe. That's another thing I'll tell you about. But this also happened, and what's interesting too, we think about wildfire. And they're like, oh, you can't build where there are trees. Well, yes, you can, because people have been thinking about this. So Tahoe has had a number of fires over the years. And so I was working very closely with the city last year when we had our big fire in South Lake Tahoe that went up the hill. And there was a giant granite cap that no one thought the fire would ever come up close to, but it did. But because the last 10 years, TRPA and all of their partners in the forestry, they had been trimming trees. They were able to create these lines to fight the fire, to divert the fire away from the city. It was almost like those old fortress days where you have people climbing over the wall and you're like dousing them with hot oil and water. I mean, that's kind of what they did. And they were able to move the fire to protect the city and to protect all the valuable assets of homes up there. So it can be done if we're strategic. It is also about making sure that we're building where there's existing infrastructure, where there is existing people, where there are existing communities, so you can band together to protect your own communities. Let me take you to another example. Related in my work up in Tahoe, we were selected in 2019 in Tahoe City. Very different area than South Lake Tahoe. This area is rural. Nothing could be used. Zero, no tools, no incentives, no SB 35, no CEQA streamlining, nothing. We are still trying to work on a site plan. We have been threatened so many times by all of our neighbors that they're going to sue us because they walk their dogs here. And these folks who are second homeowners who spend less than 15 days a year are telling us they don't know anyone who needs affordable housing. And I was, frankly, the darkest person in the room when everyone told me that. And these folks are all older, and they feel entitled, and they said, hey, I bought my own home. Why do government have to come in here and ruin our neighborhoods, right? So when you have uninformed folks who get the power of no, who get the power of a lawsuit, who are all lawyers themselves, because the median home price around us was $2 million at the time. And they're saying hell no to housing because it's going to ruin my property values. It's going to ruin my view. I had people exploding in tears because they thought their children would burn in the high school because our folks would be able to get out and clog up the roads before someone else would. And so these are the kinds of demons that we fight with, and these are the kinds of ideas, because change is scary. When you go to a community that hasn't seen change in a number of years, people don't want to change. They don't want to say yes to housing, because yes to housing means more different people will move into their communities, and that can get scary. So, barriers to affordable housing, simply put, things like high land costs. We've got things like community resistance, AKA NIMBYs, right? We've got political leaders that change every 4 years. They're gone. Someone who's going to champion your project, you hear it takes years and years and years to put these projects together. When a new person comes in, they can completely unwind every bit of progress that's been done in the administration before. We have entitlements. We've all been hearing about it. You know, we have limited tools and limited areas to be limited to certain projects that have every single stripe of every zebra that could be imaginable, can only get awarded projects. We have environmental challenges like CEQA, like dirty land. And we have things like very high cost and impact fees. And let me tell you, places like in Tahoe, it is so darn expensive to get what we call accommodations. It is cheaper and easier to build a house that has 15 bedrooms than to build 15 units. It's a heck of a lot cheaper, and the system is set up for that. And that is what they're building up in Tahoe right now, because those are all then rented out individually. By the time, so any one of these is going to kick you out. If you can't get over that hump, all that money, time, and investment, you are out. You are dead. Your project, there is risk, risk, risk. And then you've got things like financing. Talk about, so we look at our budgets, right? We've been talking about this $97 billion budget. We've got our state legislators who are going to just throw another $1 billion into the state program. Well, let me tell you how hard it is to get funding as an affordable housing project. It often takes you multiple cycles. It can take you 12 sources of financing, each one you're competing for. And then it becomes political. So the uncertainty of getting a project built that might have every great flavor of ice cream in it, you're never going to get it because somehow someone's going to tell you, well, why didn't you have pistachio? Sorry, no money for you. Anyway, by the time you can pass all that, you can get your project started. So, good things come to those that wait. So a project last week, we just opened up, this was when I was with my company Domus, project in Pittsburgh, California, an area that I have spent a lot of my career building housing in. It's a tiny piece of land that I started with the city manager 13 years ago. That was 3 presidents ago. That was after redevelopment. That was after we had 3 city managers. It died so many deaths. We had to redesign it so many times. The first time we took this, it was always going to be veterans housing. We wanted to make it veterans housing. The neighbors came unglued. They imagined all kinds of things in their heads, what kinds of neighbors they would have, how many guns they would have. So they said, for veterans housing that was going to be supportive housing for formerly homeless, you have to have 2 parking spaces per unit. So that almost killed us. We ended up having to come up with very creative ways to park it and put the parking underneath it to the cost that was so expensive that you couldn't get it built. We couldn't attract the financing because we were just outside of the perfect circles of transit. You know, we have things like only housing can be funded if you're within a half mile of perfect transit. So what happens if you're across the street from that half mile? You don't get anything. And I mean, how much of the real estate in this country, too, is round, right? So then that means sometimes you have a parcel in and sometimes you have a parcel that's out, or portion in and out. Anyway, we have these crazy rules, but fortunately, we stuck with it, and we opened 30 units of 100% homeless housing. It had no place like home funding, VASH vouchers, and we moved individuals and their families off the streets and into this housing. So it can be done, but there's a long way to go. Thanks.
Great, next up we have Jennifer Hernandez.
So you don't close with a lawyer and expect inspiration. I'm just starting with that. Also, I want to really take up, Mark, your challenge to try to connect some dots here. You talked about policy and academic. Then there's practitioners, and we hate both of you, actually, for reasons that Mia went through in detail. And I'm going to be really super provocative in this commentary, because right now, what was it, $1.4 billion that DOOR donated to sustainability? Who in this room is part of that? Because they have all kinds of fixed views about housing that are the perfection that makes sure we don't build anything. And the siloing of specialties and the siloing of policymaking, I mean, even the Pentagon figured out that the more specialized people are, the more unable they are to predict with any level of accuracy what's happening in the real world. Because you stay in silos and you don't talk to people who are living in 35-person trailers. You don't talk to the million illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants, who rushed to get driver's licenses so they could hold on to a job and get the kids to school on time because the bus took 4 hours if it came at all. You're not talking to people. You're certainly not in the trenches of trying to get anything done. And if we could talk a little bit more, and I really applaud you for bringing practitioners to this setting, but right now, our number one barrier from my perspective is a level of environmental and climate dogma that is just flat wrong. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. I spend a tremendous amount of time and have made a tremendous amount of money, and my license plate in the Tesla outside is CEQA nerd. So I'm going to talk about CEQA, and then I'm going to talk about climate. So CEQA, where is this? Am I one behind? I don't know. I'm a 62-year-old boomer. You should not trust me with technology. All right. These are the two things I'm most proud of right now. I'm actually teaching environmental justice at USC Law School, and I'm teaching it with a former state senator, Martha Escucha, and it's like EJ our way. Remember civil rights, right? It didn't used to be just environmental. It's obviously environment and civil rights. And the civil rights piece of the dialogue has fallen off. So another provocative, irritating thing that I will say. And I'll continue on this theme. So California Environmental Quality Act, 1970, Reagan, Nixon, leaders. Unlike any other, quote, law in the country, anyone can sue for any reason. Right now I'm defending a pistachio processor from a lawsuit filed by his much bigger competitor who wants to stop this guy, a farmer, from building more silos and replacing an inefficient huller line for nuts with a more energy and water efficient huller line. It's been the 4th year now of litigation, and we're in appellate court. Anybody can sue for any reason. It's really cheap, less than $25K, sometimes less than 10, because there's a contingency field component in CEQA where if the opponent of the project wins, they get paid attorney's fees and a bonus. How exciting, how exciting. There are no clear rules. Imagine getting a 100-question essay exam and having to do 100% right answers. We have judges who have said, yeah, but you should have counted traffic at that intersection on a different day. 4 years after the fact, a judge will say that, San Francisco case. So, because you screwed up CEQA, and CEQA is so important to protect the environment, you start over. Wait a minute, we start over? Can we just count it now? I mean, I'm sure it's going to be the same. No. Rescission of the project approval is the most common remedy under CEQA. Even for minor, second guessing by typically a judge, right? A very overconfident lawyer, a little irritating, usually over 60, always a humanities major, who says, yeah, but couldn't you have done this instead? And the answer is you can always do this instead, right? We're trained to ask questions that haven't been answered because that's how we can kind of maneuver. So judges can always find something. And they love these cases because otherwise they're dealing with custody disputes or whatever, and these are fun. They get to be like mini planning commissioners. All impacts are equal. Temporary construction noise, a change from the view from the sidewalk, are as important as climate change or tribal resources. 1970, a very flat world, apparently. I wasn't all that sentient. I think I was reading Whole Earth Access or something. There's no project too small under CEQA. CEQA was supposed to be like the National Environmental Policy Act, which is the forerunner, 1969, applied to major federal actions. And when you think about the fact that the feds don't get involved in most land use decisions, and even when they do get involved, it's only if it's a, quote, major action, NEPA applied to a pretty small subset of stuff in this land use housing arena. In contrast, CEQA applies, I can tell you from personal experience, to the replacement of our windows with double-paned windows in Berkeley. Wait, why? It was a $600 fee for an initial study to replace windows. What was that about? And it turns out we couldn't replace the window in our son's bedroom because it was too close to the house next door. I'm like, what are you doing, you people? These are genius rules created by genius people. No, they're good, solid, best effort rules that then get implemented by lawyers looking to achieve an objective on behalf of a client, which is too often stopping housing. And so we have a very perverted enforcement system under CEQA, where common sense is sometimes recognized, and if you want an inspirational case, I refer you to a case in Tiburon that was just decided by the First Appellate District on Thursday, which quoted me extensively, so I'm quite fond of it. Because there's a risk that's not insignificant that a court decision will undo your project approval. What do I mean by that? A completed high-rise tower in LA lost a late-breaking CEQA lawsuit and was ordered evacuated because it lost its certificate of occupancy, because it lost its insurance, because it was in violation of every covenant known to man. And for years, it sat vacant while someone screwed around. I won't even tell you the details because it's ridiculous, but it's the old spaghetti factory site. And the only thing old about it was the name. So I've done a lot of now empirical research on CEQA because I realized I couldn't win these cases anymore defending project by project. I had to sort of, what is really going on here? What's really going on here is actually beyond shocking. It's actually more worthy of like Deep Dixie 1963. And in fact, we are now residentially more segregated than we were in 1963, which is shocking. So this is a slide showing where housing is the top target of CEQA lawsuits. Infill housing is the top target of CEQA lawsuits. Multifamily housing is the top target of CEQA lawsuits. And CEQA lawsuits are overwhelmingly filed in whiter, wealthier, and healthier neighborhoods. If there's a better construct for what constitutes housing discrimination than CEQA lawsuits, I don't know what it is. This slide shows heights corresponding to the number of units, so anything that's not a flat square is multifamily. And then the aqua color, or green, whatever it looks like now, is transit proximate, the half mile between perfect transit. Perfect transit is transit at 15-minute intervals. So when we qualify with a project for perfect transit, I have an associate who checks the monthly schedule of the bus line to make sure they don't cut back to one fewer bus in an era of COVID when no one is riding the bus. And in fact, even before COVID, bus ridership had dropped massively. This is not a housing policy. This is a climate policy. And I'll tell you why in a second. But the biggest challenges, you could see the west side had most of the challenges, CEQA housing, almost over 10,000 units challenged over a 3-year period in the South Coast region. And most of those were multifamily, and virtually all of them were infill. The tan-colored areas are disadvantaged communities where there's higher levels of poverty, ethnicity, pollution. You can see that most of the lawsuits are filed in whiter, wealthier areas. This is what we've done, and I have to blame my home city of San Francisco, where I was born, and immediately transported to Pittsburgh. Thanks very much for the housing project. I was allowed to, I think, go back to see Godspell when I was in Catholic school, maybe 7 or 8 or something, but I grew up in Pittsburgh. And we used to talk about, with total contempt, my working class family, the idiots from San Francisco. And it didn't really matter what the issue was, because they were uniformly idiots when it came to working class issues. They were. What we have done, per The Color of Law, Richard Rothstein's fabulous book, good guy, good friend, is displace communities of color, purple loss areas, to exurbs, including Pittsburgh, because that's where housing is affordable. This smart growth policy that our dainty San Franciscan and Berkeley and Stanford academics, planners, environmentalists, ooh, urban limit lines, ooh, neighborhood preservation, ooh, shade and shadow as impacts, have created a racial exodus, have destroyed Legacy communities with gentrification that managed to survive, improbably enough, redlining and urban renewal, which has a different and less polite name. So that's CEQA. When you're that wrong-headed, one thing that specialists can be counted on doing is doubling down and making it worse. And so here we are now in a climate emergency. Got it. No dispute. Here's California, less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Governor Brown says, unless we do this in a reasonable enough way, our efforts are going to be futile because no one will follow our lead. So what is our climate focus? Well, first off, we got to really tackle housing. Californians have the lowest per capita greenhouse gas emissions in the state. We should be inviting people, if we cared about global warming, we should be inviting people from hotter states or colder states or coal-powered states to come here. Instead, we only count emissions. Oh, sorry about that. What's missing is fraudulent climate math. The first slide, we've lost 7.5 million Californians, overwhelmingly because of housing costs. Over the last few years, we've gained about 5 million and change. But those 7.5 million housing cost losses, 100% moved to states where their families' greenhouse gas emissions went up. By not solving California housing crisis, we are making more greenhouse gas emissions. We also don't count, the California Air Resources Board, imports. So when the, Lehigh cement factory here, when it supplies cement, everyone goes, greenhouse gas cement, huge source, gotta retrofit, gotta do all kinds. When we import cement from China, which is made on a coal grid and transported thousands of miles by bunker fuel, 0 greenhouse gas. 0. If there is a more perfect way to outsource what few jobs are still available to people who don't have fancy degrees, then California's climate math, I don't know what they are. Grow a tomato, fine. Make salsa, natural gas. Take the tomatoes to Nevada, natural gas. Oh, thank God. GHG-free salsa. Why have you let these people get away with this? They admitted years ago that this was a, quote, flawed methodology. Tuesday of last week, they said, yeah, but we're going to keep using it. Where are you? Housing policy people, academic people, economists, where are you on climate? You're missing. You're like, it's their issue. No, it's not. They have come in with climate. Okay, so fine. I'm going to skip a little bit. Low VMT. Let's put more housing in the urban core where there's transit. This is Long Beach. This is the map created by the South Coast Association of Governments to lower greenhouse gas in Long Beach. We had to ferret it out with a Public Records Act request. The slides, it's very hard to see, sorry. All those green dots there in the middle is where new housing should be. There's a train and a metro train and buses there. All the red areas are where there should be no housing. Because within this city, there are high VMT areas, people drive, and low VMT areas, people don't drive as much, especially on a per capita basis. This is the redlining map. The red areas are whites only. They have nicer homes, parks, little need for transit, lower density. Let's preserve their environment. The areas that SCAG wants no housing are $100,000+ median household incomes. The areas SCAG wants all housing, the poorest Hmong population outside of Fresno in California. Overwhelmingly, brown, poor areas are where there's low per capita VMT. Lots of reasons why. They didn't have the resources to fight transit. They're actually not using transit. Terrific work by both USC and UCLA on the drop in transit, especially among low-income commuters who pre-COVID could buy a $3,000 completely indestructible Toyota and get to where they need to go in half or 1/8 the time it would take to take the bus, if there was a bus. But is anyone talking to them in this low VMT criteria? Is anyone looking at redlining maps from 2 years ago, created by the consulting firm run by the head of the Regents until March of UC? We are creating today the template for more, not less, racial redlining, displacement, gentrification, and last point, we don't know how to build housing that's more expensive than high density in urban cores. I mean, maybe like 15-room mansions, but on a per square foot basis, a steel tower with cement costs 5 to 7 times more to build than a wood-framed, of any kind almost, unit. Without the elevators, without all the fancy HVAC systems. Are we paying attention to that? No, we're looking at residential use within the unit of energy. Does that study even include common area emissions? I don't think so. Did it include the building materials for that kind of structure on a per resident? No, of course not, because that's like cement from China. We don't care, as long as it's not made in California. We are prescribing a solution for housing that is completely unaffordable. Californians make more money than the rest of the country, but our annual median income, cowboy math, is about 1/10 of our purchase price for a median income home. We just can't do that math anymore, guys. It's economics, and everyone, oh, wages are low. No, we get paid more than the rest of the country. We have policies, including putting $150,000 fees on each unit, and expect somehow to have, quote, affordable units. Come on. There's way too much brain power in this room for you to let this persist, but you got to blow up more than your own little boxes. It's not a question of showering some people with more money and hoping for the best, right? Anybody have an addict in the family? What happens when you give them a room key and hope for the best? How's that work for you? One thing we do know, when the state wants to get something done, like homeless shelters, first thing they need is a CEQA exemption. So we did that. Oh, thank God. We don't really want to get housing built, because actually, if only we can get rid of about 10 million people from California, we'd meet our climate goals. Yay! So come on. And I'll finish with transportation. The graph on the right is from the Obama administration in 2016 and shows a decrease, the solid line, in smog-forming emissions from tailpipes from the nation's vehicles, cars and light-duty trucks, pickup trucks. We got rid of 99% of the smog. We didn't know how we were going to do it. Who knew from catalytic converters? We didn't think you could even remove lead from gas. It took a lot of work. We screwed up sometimes. But we got rid of 98% of tailpipe emissions. We're going to electric vehicles. At the same time, as population and economic success increased, our vehicle miles traveled increased. Those are the bars on this chart. We can solve for greenhouse gas. We can solve for climate. But solving for climate on the backs of working people who will never be able to buy a home in California, where we actually still earn more than the rest of the country, is absolutely a nice continuum of eugenicism, forced racial segregation, population bomb. Oh, those teeming brown people in Bombay. Oh, if only they wouldn't be there. You guys, we're at a really, really, really dangerous time in the country. We got to make home ownership an achievable objective for Californians today at about a $400,000 price point. We can build it all over the country. But in California, it's impossible based on, sorry, pointy-headed academics and policymakers. Pittsburgh, California. I'm very rough. Bye.
Okay, that was really great. We've got a lot of different angles of expertise on how to solve or make improvements, at least, on our housing issues in California. Maybe just to follow up on the last talk, given that it posed a bunch of interesting questions in my mind. If we could change CEQA, if there was actually a concrete revision, what would be that revision, and why haven't, what are the barriers to legislation approving it?
So we've already seen from MIA the consequence of having a CEQA exemption in SB 35 versus not, right? A huge difference. One's built, one's going to be fought for decades. Until 1983, CEQA only applied at what I would call the zoning level. So once a city zoned, then whatever was authorized in the zoning code could be built. And CEQA didn't apply. And a court came by and said, yeah, but the city still has the discretion to set conditions for that project that complies with the zoning code. Put the driveway there, not there. That discretion to impose conditions means that the project has to go through CEQA again. So eliminating duplicative CEQA review, but it's impossible because cities cannot require union labor agreements for private projects at the zone level. Only by threatening the project can a union, construction trade union, leverage the CEQA project labor agreement with a threatened lawsuit or an actual lawsuit. And so that has been the political blockade to having a rational CEQA level, zoning. Where are we going to put housing? Fair question. Controversial, complicated. Let's do CEQA. As opposed to at the project level. Oh yeah, that was then. Go again, try again, have a good time, hire Jennifer.
And in addition to labor unions, CEQA is often used by local governments because they don't have the resources. For example, we have Prop 13. A lot of local governments don't have the money to invest in the future development, right? So putting in new sewers, putting in new, whatever needs to happen when you've got a parking lot and now you're going to put 100 units on it, right? So CEQA enables the jurisdictions to say, mitigation. You must provide this, you must upsize this, you must do all these things. So in many cases, the first person in an infill area, the first developer goes in, they have to fix 65 years worth of problems.
Although cities do have the authority to impose those as conditions of approval
Yes.
outside CEQA, but everybody's gotten lazy and put everything in CEQA.
So it becomes a convenience. So not only is it, CEQA is a trading tool. It makes everyone come to the table and it makes everyone cut a deal. And by cutting a deal, you've just done what? You've made it more difficult, more expensive to get the housing, and then it's vastly much easier, especially in a commercial zone, to build a McDonald's with a drive-through than it is to build like the three-story mixed-use development.
Oh, big time.
So it's become a tool to say no. And so, even if, and the site I showed you that hasn't been built is the 15 units to the acre. You go through all the general plan zoning to get your zoning approved, but yet you still have to go through yet another series of project level CEQA. So if we, as Jennifer talked about, if you just did it once and said, if your zoning is 15 units to the acre, let's say, or multifamily zoning, that's all you need. As long as you meet your, similar to SB 35, your local sort of, prescriptive zoning? No, what do they call it?
Objective standards.
Thank you, objective standards, which means height and bulk of the buildings, et cetera. Then you're ready to go. Then we'll get more housing built because there's certainty. Because again, the McDonald's developer knows that certainly he can build that fast food restaurant and make so much money.
It's the difference between housing based on the rule of law what are the laws? I have to color inside those lines, versus the old obscenity standard under CEQA. I know an impact when I see it, and I don't like this one. So that's, we're not going to negotiate our way to 3 million units, unit by unit, under CEQA.
Great. Maybe just to switch gears a bit and think about sort of COVID reshaping where labor is going and how that affects housing demand. How is work from home, or the shift toward increasing work from home, interacting with where people want to build and are able to build going forward?
Let me just say, has anyone heard Zoom towns? Tahoe was called a Zoom town. Truckee's median home price is now $1 million per unit. So what it's enabled people to do is, of course, remote work, but choose where they live and buy in places that were at the time, from San Francisco, you can actually see trees, have an outdoor space, and afford a home. So it's changing the land use and costs.
So Caltrans and SCAG formed a broadband transportation study group, which I'm part of. And you're like, broadband transportation? Broadband avoids trips. And we now have data even from rural areas and from lower income workers who have to be physically present to be paid. So they don't have the keyboard economy option of staying at home. They have to go in. But everyone is using the internet when they have service to make fewer trips. So they're banking online, or they're doing remote training with YouTube and getting the certificates and whatever. They're doing telemed, and they've changed shifts so that no one's doing peak hour commute trips 5 days a week, almost no one. And I asked the question, which was very politically inconvenient, which I love to do, which is, so what's the cost of bringing high quality broadband service to all of these households versus the cost of putting everyone on a grid of fixed route public transit systems using 100-plus-year-old technology at half-mile interval, 15-minute headways? And no one wanted to answer that question. AI is going to further change, commute patterns. Once you no longer have to pay attention on the road, then the commutes are likely to become longer. Enrico and I have, I think, a healthy area of agreement, which is it's cool to live in cities. And for a lot of us, it's the right thing to do for at least part of our life. Where I come in as a strong disagreement is it doesn't work for everybody. And it doesn't work, for example, for lots of families. And it is very disrespectful to impose that as a one-size-fits-all solution. High-density infill rentals are not an acceptable path forward for many people in California. You go tell your cousins they'll never buy a house. Really? How's that going to go? They're going to move to Texas, where their greenhouse gas will increase.
In thinking about the question of remote work and work from home on the impact of housing demand in different parts of the state, I think it's important to distinguish between the immediate effect of COVID in the past 2 years, in particular during 2020 when everything was shut down and people were, 100% of office workers were remote, and some of the lucky were working in Tahoe, from the future after the pandemic is over and after we feel safe around each other and after there's enough transition period. And I think in that respect, it's not clear that the number of people working 100% remote is going to be as high as a lot of the media accounts are describing. I've been doing some work looking at the number, looking at job openings, so new jobs that are created that are 100% remote, and seeing where they are, how many there are, and how they have changed. And what I'm finding is the numbers are much smaller than what you might expect from hearing anecdotes or reading the media. Before COVID, for the past, for the 10 years before COVID, essentially, 2% of all office jobs were 100% remote. With COVID, that share triples, essentially, in most cities, including the San Francisco Bay Area. But even now, we're talking about 6% of new jobs being 100% remote. So 6% of new office jobs being 100% remote, which is more than before, but it's still a trivial number of office jobs. So I think that in thinking about the future and in thinking about how work from home might change the demand for housing and the cost of housing, I think it's implausible to think that most office workers will have the option of working somewhere else and reporting to an office that is here. I think will remain the small exception.
I have a very different perspective, and the data I have is not the 100% remote, which I don't know too many people are trying to do. But if you go to the hybrid model, 2 or 3 days in the office, or even a set amount of time a month in the office just to get reconnected, now the numbers zoom up. Pre-COVID, more people were working from home in the SCAG region than taking public transit. Pre-COVID. So the work from home phenomenon is very real, and it has, by the way, a ton of benefits in terms of like more time with your family and ability to maybe get a workout in instead of spending 3 hours a day in a car. I mean, again, if we could build $400,000 for sale units in San Francisco, life would be interesting. But instead, those people are buying in the Central Valley, and they're spending now 4 hours a day on commutes. They're not doing that, by the way. If you talk to them, they've figured out some workarounds, right? They're sleeping in a friend's couch. The construction workers those guys sleep in their pickup trucks a couple times a week. So we do not have an understanding that is accurate. We have a lot of academic views in support of urbanization, well, even wildfire. I mean, we've been protecting Californians against wildfire for a long time. Santa Rosa caught fire, my God. The fire jumped the Sacramento River in Suisun Bay, my God. But new homes, new communities, those are quite resilient. The former state fire marshal of California locates his command posts in new communities because they are fire resilient. When we have in mind that that's how we're going to build, we're not putting wood shingles on roofs anymore. So the idea that we can only build in parking lots, in California is 6% built, 6%. In most other states, we're cresting past 10%. That's the, quote, built environment. We're way under that, and we also have the highest population density in the country. What is it, 3 of the 5 highest population density areas are here? It's not like we don't have density, we do. But the dense product type for housing is simply unaffordable. And stop inventing money. Oh, we just need to give people more money. No, I mean, teachers and cops cannot afford a home. We're breaking society. Please, it's an and. We need all of it.
Let me jump in. Couple things. I was talking to the state director of housing and community development. 100% of all of their hires are 100% working from home. So that's already happening at the state level, and they're getting a lot more applicants to take these jobs. The other thing I want to talk about is adaptive reuse. We now have office buildings that are half empty. We now have businesses that are no longer viable. We have retail strips that have no customers. And so I had a bill this year with Senator Wachowski, a SB 1369, that was going to take the LA Adaptive Reuse Bill, the LA Adaptive Reuse Ordinance, if anyone knows that. It took downtown from what it was, decrepit, nothing happening at night, to a 24-hour city with baby strollers and people walking their pets at lunchtime. 30% of all the new housing production in downtown LA was because of adaptive reuse. Tried to bring that statewide. It got killed and not even introduced because it did not include union labor.
And it was CEQA exempt in LA, which is how that all happened.
So there is an opportunity around looking at our cities and taking, essentially it's tenant improvements, right? You're going to move walls, you're going to add a couple plumbing fixtures, you can build housing. But now the state's telling us you can't do that without having to go through, the CEQA process and hiring union labor. Okay.
So I think it's true that on the work from home, I think it's a very consequential question. It is true that hybrid work is diffuse and is likely to be here to stay, but it's quite a different impact on housing demand than 100% remote. 100% remote allows you to live in anywhere you want, in a very affordable part of the state or the country. Hybrid work doesn't. It still ties you to an office. Yes, you can probably be a little bit farther away from the office, but ultimately, if you have a job in, say, one of the high-tech firms in Palo Alto, you will need to be in the metro area, in the Bay Area. So I think the two things are completely different in terms of the impact on affordability. On wildfire, I just wanted to add one thing. One interesting thing that is happening, unfortunately, due to the wildfire, is that insurance company has started pricing in the risk of insuring homeowner in the most affected part of the state. In my view, that's actually a good thing, because it means that finally the market is internalizing this cost, is it making more expensive to build in areas that are at risk. And misguided state policy that we, the state of California, have adopted is essentially to subsidize homeowners who live in wildfire-prone area by essentially providing a state option when there is no private insurer who is willing to insure them. I think it's misguided because it's essentially saying the market is not going to insure you because it's risky. We, taxpayer, are going to subsidize you to live in a wildfire-prone area. I think it's misguided. It's one example of a policy that is diverting development in area where we shouldn't be building.
So if adopted, that change would undo about 50 years worth of civil rights and housing law. Right now, under the Regional Housing Needs Assessment Program, every community is responsible for doing its fair share to accommodate housing demand. That means South Lake Tahoe. It means Chico. It means Fresno. It doesn't mean nowhere, and it means unincorporated county areas. That's how the law works. And then we just 2 years ago passed affirmatively furthering fair housing, which is don't create new ghettos. You have to spread low-income housing through a jurisdiction. That doesn't mean that they are going to burn in hell or in a forest fire. We know how to build. And if you look at the statistics that were developed for SB 12, which proposed virtual ban on housing in high wildfire areas. And by the way, you get a high wildfire area ranking if you're more than a certain number of minutes from a fire station. It doesn't mean that you're living in dead and dying brush. You could be in the middle of the desert with nothing around you and just be far enough away. Little distraction on what it is to be high fire, because most people have everything on the other side of 280 is high fire, and a good bit of land this side of 280 is high fire. A lot of West LA is high fire. Again, they tend to be whiter and wealthier. I wonder what this theme is.
All right, thank you very much. I think we're already 5 minutes over, so it was a great debate.
Okay, as I said earlier, I see boxes, people holding boxes. So it looks like there's box lunches, there's restrooms. Let's try to sort of start out around 12:05. So that means you grab your box lunch, you come back in here, eat it in here. See you shortly. Thanks for a great session to Rebecca and the team.